one of the things you got to look at, the biggest connection is the fact that the Zodiac astrology as we see it today, in some ways, is not like how it used to be. And I mean that as far as, tarot card readings and people looking at the horoscope every day. That wasn't what it was for in ancient times. So, we're going to start out by getting into that and understanding the ancient way, which is the real way. So go back during ancient times, we know many civilizations we can see talked about the stars, talked about the zodiac, talked about beings coming down, and everything had to do with the universe and do with the constellations or what have you. And it's something that we can't ignore, when we go and look. So we see the Indians, the Native Americans, was really obsessed with constellations, namely the Pleiades, and the ancient Egyptians as well. And a lot of things was done based upon, these star signs and the zodiac all over the world. We find it, different cultures, different countries, different animals. So we know when we see something like that, it has to be something to it. So just like we find pyramids all around the world, we find the zodiac all around the world. So it's something that we can't ignore. And we have to look at, what that's about. So we know today, everybody gets into horoscopes. Everybody wants to know how to feel today, what to do today, what their future is going to be, so on and so forth. And you got to be thinking to yourself, how is it that these people can know, certain things? And a lot of times you read your horoscope and it's bang on. And sometimes you read it and it's like, that's not me. And we have to understand, how does that work? Really think about it. How would that be possible for somebody to look at a chart or look at the constellations and determine your mood or what you should do with your life? Like, how does that connect? How does that equate? So this is what we're going to get into in this video, to understand how you make that connection between what they call the heavenly bodies and our earthly bodies, our actual bodies. Like, how does that equate? How does that connection work? And when you go and look, it was an essential part, huge part throughout history that just stopped really recently when things started to become more technological. And as we started to grow out of the religious age into this new, political, technological age. And as I said, as I talked about before, stuff when the church was coming up was done away with. The old ways was done away with. So anybody that was an alchemist, anybody that was a real philosopher, they was considered, witches or warlocks. And there was people being burnt for being smart or just making a point about the stars or planets. So we had this going on. But when you go back to medieval times, they had this practice to where there was a law that you could not operate or perform certain procedures on a person if you didn't first check with the moon. You had to check for the position of the moon before they would let you operate on the patient, because it was really important back then. And as you'll see in this video, there was a big connection between, religion and astrology back then that a lot of people don't understand. So you couldn't even, give medicine at certain times without checking on the moon. This was a law. It's one of these things they swept under the rug. So this whole thing has to do with medical astrology, and the ancient Egyptians is where you'll find this talked about the most. And we know the Greeks and the Romans will piggyback on it. You can find it in Persia, and the Arabs actually use it as well. So medical astrology, and medical astrology is really based on the four humors. And you'll understand what I call the humors in a second. So you have the four humors, right? So the four humors would be blood. It would be phlegm, mucus, phlegm. You have yellow bile and black bile. These are the four humors. So with the four humors, it's basically dealing with, liquids in the body. And how they understood it back then was these liquids, if they were unbalanced or too much of one or too little of the other, it will cause, mood swings. It will cause you to feel ill. This is how they was able to really look at, and diagnose a person by, these things. Back then they had bloodletting, and they would check your blood, and, Yellow bile has to do with urine, and this is what they would check. We still do the same thing to this day. You have a urinalysis, you have a blood test for them to determine what's wrong with you. But this is what they was doing way back then, medieval times. This was, law that you had to do it this way and check with the moon, because the moon played a pivotal role in whether or not they could figure out what was wrong with you and how to fix the problem. So it says here, although the theory of the four humors does appear in some Hippocratic texts, the Hippocratic writers accepted the existence of only two humors, while some refrained from discussing the humoral theory at all. Humoralism, or the doctrine of the four temperaments, which we're going to get into that in a second, as a medical theory, retained its popularity for centuries, largely through the influence of the writings of Galen. Hippocrates' theory of four humors was linked with the popular theory of the four elements, which we're going to get into this: earth, fire, water, and air, which basically is a big deal when it comes to these, proposed by Empedocles. But this link was not proposed by Hippocrates or Galen, who referred primarily to bodily fluids. While Galen thought that the humors were formed in the body rather than ingested, he believed the different foods had varying potential to act upon the body to produce different humors. Warm food, for example, tended to produce yellow bile, while cold foods tended to produce phlegm. Seasons of the year, periods of life, geographic regions, and occupations also influenced the nature of the humors formed. As such, certain seasons and geographic areas were understood to cause imbalances in the humors, leading to varying types of diseases across time and space. For example, cities exposed to hot winds were seen as having higher rates of digestive problems as a result of excess phlegm running down from the head, while cities exposed to cold winds were associated with diseases of the lungs, acute disease, and hardness of the bowels, as well as ophthalmies, which is issues with the eyes, and nosebleeds. Cities to the west, meanwhile, were believed to produce weak, unhealthy, pale people that were subject to all manner of diseases. In the treatise, Air, Water, Places, and Hippocratic Physician is described arriving to an unnamed city where they test various factors of nature, including the wind, water, and soil, to predict the direct influence on the disease specific to the city based on the season and the individual. Diseases could be the result of the corruption of one or more of the humors, which could be caused by environmental circumstances, dietary changes, or many other factors. These defects were thought to be caused by vapors inhaled or absorbed by the body. We're going to talk about that later because you got to think about that. Vapors inhaled or absorbed by the body. Greeks and Romans, and the later Muslim and Western European medical establishments that adopted and adapted classical medical philosophy, believed that each of these humors would wax and wane in the body depending on diet and activity. When a patient was suffering from a surplus of imbalance of one of the four humors, then said patient's personality and or physical health could be negatively affected. So we have the four humors, and the four humors basically split the body, in four parts. So the four humors, then we have the four temperaments. So four humors, four temperaments that corresponds with the four humors. So the four temperaments would be sanguine, then we have choleric, then we have melancholic, then we have phlegmatic. So basically you have, too much blood, you will have, sanguine. And this would basically deal with emotions. So the four temperaments will deal with your emotions. So we always say, you got a crazy temper, your temper. This is where it comes from, the temperaments. So the four temperaments. So now we have this connection with, so far the moon, with our body, this liquid in our body, which we know how the moon reacts to liquid. And then now we have these emotions. So you got, the four humors, and now we have the four temperaments. And then when you have, let's say, too much blood, you have this, sanguine effect, which deals with basically, and not all the effects are bad effects. Understand there's a lot more, but we won't get into the basic ones. So sanguine would basically deal with you being, optimistic in a bad situation. You're not crazy. You're not, too up, too down. You're optimistic and you're positive, right? So we have choleric. And choleric will basically deal with you being, irritated, being in a bad mood. And you have what melancholic basically is sadness and depression. And then you have phlegmatic, which is basically, you being calm. You chill, you calm, you don't really have too much emotions at the moment. You're really unemotional when this happens. So when you have too much blood, you have sanguine. When you have too much yellow bile, that causes the choleric. Black bile would be, of course, melancholic. Note the melon, has to deal with blackness. So black bile. So that's sadness, depression. Of course, they would give us the word shit, black. And then you have phlegm, which would deal with the phlegmatic, which deals with you being calm and, cool. So again, 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm. And then we have the 4 temperaments. These split the body in 4 parts. Okay. 4 temperaments: choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, and sanguine. So chart right there, you can see what I'm talking about. And again, the words, we got to understand these play on words and who's giving us these words. And, we have 4 humors, humor, which you're humorous. Humor has to do with your mood. What type of humor are you in? And then understand, we get the 4 humors. We're talking about BC, talking about 4th century BC. So we get the humors before we get the word human, which we didn't get into the 13th century, the word human. So understand where they got that human from, even though we know hue is like a color. But remember, we talked about yellow bile, black bile, it's colors. We're talking about a time where they're trying to put all this stuff together, and words is just bouncing off each other. And we start tracing words back, you'll see where a lot of them came from. And of course, this stuff will be Greek. So we have the 4 humors and we have the 4 temperaments, and they split the body into 4 parts. These 4 parts also correspond to, 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. So these also correspond with the zodiac, which we'll get into more in a second. So you have this, 4 temperaments, 4 elements, 4 humors, the zodiac, and this would basically give us the zodiac man, which this video is basically about the zodiac body. So when you go back in medieval times, this was something that was, it was known. It was something everybody used, understanding the zodiac man. So this is where we get, Jesus on the cross of the zodiac. It comes from this. And it's one of the things that if you was around at that time, you would just know. You would be able to make that connection quickly if you was a person that was into astrology and understanding the body in little esoteric circles. These are the people who started to come out when the Bible was introduced, and it was preaching it, and these people was coming out and saying, no, this is astrology, this is that. And these are the people they was killing off, and why they basically just came out and said, well, if you know about astrology, if you know about alchemy and so on and so forth, it's witchcraft, demon worship, because they was making these connections and understanding what this stuff was about. So you have, they show the zodiac man on the cross of the zodiac. Jesus was shown the same way. There are too many medieval pictures, paintings of Jesus on the zodiac, as you can see here. He's the sun. Look around him. You have Jesus, you have the zodiac around him, because they understood what he represents and that he's basically you, the zodiac man. So much to this. Jesus is you, the zodiac man. I talked about how Jesus is your consciousness. God is your all-powerful subconscious. You represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, which are the disciples, which is all of the signs, which is all of us, basically. So this is something, as I said, everybody knew about. They all knew. They all understood what this stuff represented and how it was. The church and astrology back then was connected because, as I said, it was a law for you to understand the moon's position in order for you to practice medicine. You had to know certain things about the body, and you had to understand these things about the zodiac. So the church and the zodiac went hand in hand, and it's, clear when you look at a lot of the medieval churches that stand today. The entryway, when you walk in, they call it the portal. When you walk in, you see the little archway where it's a lot of zodiac carvings there. So it says here, I'm just going to skip down here, and it says, of the zodiac in this religious imagination is echoed by at least 50 extant ecclesiastical buildings featuring exterior sculpted zodiac signs built between 1050 and 1500 across Western Europe. 39 cathedrals, basilicas, abbeys, and churches feature zodiacal sculptures on one or more portals, the majority from 12th century France. Despite the pervasive presence of this motif in medieval art, only about 10% of these zodiac portals have been studied extensively, particularly in relation to one another. This elite 10% of zodiac portals connected with wealthy urban or monastic centers overseen by a powerful group of clergy and aristocrats represent only an oblique keyhole glimpse of this popular image cycle. It is only by taking a comprehensive stance, including relatively minor churches, that a new understanding emerges, specifically a deeper relationship between architecture, zodiac signs, and church portals. Prefaced by the wide scope of the motif and its role in church decorations, it is beneficial to re-examine even the most studied zodiac portals. This study will therefore present new interpretations of zodiac portals by carefully defining medieval astrology and reimagining the zodiac in its medieval context with a clear view of astronomy, processions, and viewership. So it's a clear connection between the zodiac and Christianity, the church or what have you. We understand the moon worship with Islam, the sun worship with Christianity. You can look at the Pope, the hats, the signs, the symbol. It's talking about the sun. The sun and the moon is everything. You can't have one without the other. When you go back during, ancient Egyptian times, any ancient civilization, the sun and the moon is everything. But the Bible is giving you so many hints, as to, I gave you guys examples before about God being the sun and so many different times they pointed out in the Bible. But if you remember, with Jesus is born, the first sign. What's the first sign of the zodiac? Will be Virgo, the virgin. So we have Jesus coming into the world, virgin, virgin birth, Virgo, right? So what does it say in Revelations? In Revelations is talking about him coming back as the Lion of Judah, the lion. What is the last zodiacal symbol? It's Leo, the lion. So Jesus is supposed to come back as the lion, and he's supposed to bring the kingdom of heaven with him and be this Lion of Judah and come back and, so on and so forth. Now, remember, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus and he's telling Nicodemus about, you can see the kingdom of heaven when you're born again. And Nicodemus is like, what you mean born again? I gotta, go back in the womb to be born again. How does that work? Understand. So it's giving you reincarnation. So he's giving you that whole cycle of life and death, birth, rebirth. It's the same situation. So you have Jesus coming in as the Virgo from the Virgin Mary, and then coming back. It's talk about him basically being reincarnated. Jesus is you. So the whole thing about, hey, you're going to come again. Jesus is going to return. You're going to return. And the zodiac plays a big part in all of this. I've talked about reincarnation a lot in a lot of my videos. It's giving you that you're going to return. And that's what it is. That's basically what it's talking about. It's not no place you're going to go in heaven or anything like that. It's clearly telling you what heaven is. Heaven is the woman's womb. That's where you're going to come back through the birth canal, how water breaks and then she gives birth to you. So we got into this whole thing, but understand how the zodiac plays a part in that when it's trying to give you those hints. Virgo, first sign, Jesus coming back, which will be the end times, the end of the zodiac. Leo, the lion. Okay. So of course, we got to think about this whole thing and how the moon will actually affect us, bodily, like how it would affect us, our moods. So we understand basically anywhere you live in the world, the lowest level would be sea level, right? So if the moon way up there can affect the tides, the currents, what have you, then us living in our, apartment on the second floor or fifth floor, basically being closer to it, we would be affected. It's just something that sounds crazy and spooky because we ain't really taught about this, but we understand the effects the moon have, and we understand about mood swings. We understand with women how that works with period, and the whole thing with when your girl's on her period run. So this is one of the reasons why they give us the werewolf, and it's a full moon. It's like a werewolf is going to come out and this dude's going to be crazy or what have you. This werewolf is going to chase you around and kill you. And this is where this stuff comes from. The tide of the moon basically turning the tides or what have you. So it will all depend on the phases of the moon. So how we are affected by the moon will depend on the moon phases. So we got a bunch of moon phases, as you can see here. And this basically deals with how much light is going to be shining on the moon. And that will determine how much of the moon we'll see, whether it be, crescent moon or quarter moon or half moon or full moon, and, so on and so forth. Really depends on how much sunlight reflects off of it. And this would basically correspond with us and us having this effect, the moon having this effect on us. I talked about in many videos before about how it's this whole thing with the moon, and, some of the movies depicting us destroying the moon. And it was like, okay, we destroy the moon. What will that change? And the moon is supposed to play a major role with vibration, which, any type of feeling or emotion we would deal with frequency and vibration. So the moon would have to be putting out a frequency and a vibration that is completely different, that would affect liquids. So, the airs carry this vibration, this frequency, or what have you. We talked about how you say certain things to water, and you can change its composition on a microscopic level, whether it be peaceful or, bad words. It's cymatics. We talked about how the sands could change with certain frequency. There's so much into it that we got to understand. And then we got to realize, like I said before, you can't see the Wi-Fi signal. You can't see the Bluetooth signal. We know it's out there. We can't see it. We know it exists. It will be the same type of situation with the moon, where we have this presence, this energy that's affecting us, that's affecting, liquids. So we talk about the moon here. We understand horoscopes have to do, the zodiac, for most part, people understand it has to do with the sun, the sun signs. And to understand this, you got to understand first, go back into the four humors. As I said, the four humors correspond to four elements, which earth, wind, fire, water. And this has to do, of course, largely with the zodiac, when you understand what the zodiac is. But you have this, and you have to understand, if you have four humors, right, which correspond with four elements, which correspond with the four temperaments. So what we're talking about here, we have this temperaments, as I said, temperature and elements. So obviously the four temperaments, the four humors, the four elements has to do with the four seasons. So we're bringing this whole thing together. So we have the four seasons, and the whole, the word temperament, which comes from the Latin word temperare. It's like temperare. Sounds like temporary, but it's temperare, which basically means to mix. So what does that mean? So when they giving us the temperaments, these temperaments are mixtures, and these mixtures of the temperaments give us seasons. So these seasons corresponds with, our moods, or, the humors or the temperaments. So the four humors are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. So blood would be hot and wet. That equals spring. Yellow bile would be hot and dry, which equals summer. Black bile would be cold and dry, which equals fall. And phlegm would be cold and wet, which equals winter. And as we already know, temperature, the weather, the seasons affect your mood. Different times of the year affect your mood. It's just stuff they don't tell us, so we don't understand how much it affects us. So it says here, seasonal forecast, your skin will be drier. The most common response to fall's return is drier skin. Many of us find ourselves reapplying lip balm more frequently, and maybe even using a stronger moisturizer. This can be attributed to the decreasing temperature and humidity, which forces the skin to work harder to maintain hydration. According to dermatologists, the skin thrives most in consistent conditions. This means that every seasonal shift and change in weather acts like a shock to the system, disrupting the typical chemical balance of our skin and causing dryness and sometimes severe acne. Another consequence of seasonal change that many people experience is increased weight. Like many other mammals, humans are known to store fat during the winter months. On a scientific level, this is due to the fact that during the seasonal change between late summer and early fall, our bodies increase their insulin resistance. This causes our livers to increase fat production, so that we can store fat in our tissues and be better prepared for the winter. The best way to combat fat buildup is through diet and exercise. Aerobic exercise like swimming and running is especially effective at stimulating the metabolism and burning calories, shining a bright light on seasonal affective disorder. Unfortunately, the changing of the seasons can have even more serious repercussions than dry skin and weight gain. For example, seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, can cause major depressive episodes, usually beginning in late fall or early winter. The Journal Archives for General Psychiatry found that SAD causes individuals to secrete the hormone melatonin for longer periods during winter nights than during summer nights. This implies that SAD drives people to sleep more during the winter, even when their bodies are fully rested. Similarly, the Journal of Psychosomatic Research published a study in which participants slept nearly 3 hours more each day in October than any other time of the year. They linked the result of this study to the fact that hypersomnia, the medical term for excessive daytime sleepiness, sometimes occurs when the air starts to crisp up, as it does in fall. Depressive episodes and excessive amounts of sleep can severely impact one's daily function and inhibit our ability to accomplish essential tasks. For this reason, it is important to remain attentive to changes in your general well-being during winter months. If you feel you have SAD, speak to your doctor about using a light therapy box. It's important to be sure that the light therapy approach will help your condition and not negatively affect any other disorders. So we look at it. We got these 4 humors, and these 4 humors split our body into 4 parts. We have these 4 temperaments that basically deals with these 4 humors, that deals with our mood. This is all being basically triggered by the moon, and you can say the sun as well, because without the sun shining on the moon, we don't get what we get. But there's also the elemental part of it, where we have, the 4 elements, what corresponds with the 4 temperaments and the 4 humors. So the Zodiac, finally, we get into the actual Zodiac. And the Zodiac, of course, 12 signs. And then the Zodiac makes up these 4 elements. So the 4 elements basically get 3 star signs each, which will give us the 12 signs of the Zodiac. And then when you look at where these signs correspond to, of course, you get it. We have earth signs, we have air signs, we have water signs, and, fire signs. And what a lot of people don't understand, again, you have these elemental, Zodiac signs. And your sign, most people just get into, I'm a Cancer, I'm an Aquarius. And they look at what their sign is talking about, and they don't understand the role that the elements play on their actual mood, the physical part of it. So when you go back and start breaking down all the temperaments and the humors, then you start to make sense of it. How, well, wait a minute, if I put this together correctly, I could kind of figure out, what it's talking about. So when you go and look at, your elemental Zodiac signs, and, people know this already, you have different moods, of course. Let's start with water. It would be Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Water signs are intuitive, emotional, and sensual. These people tend to tap into great resources of their inner life to process situations and experiences. They are intrinsically able to connect with others in a sensitive and vulnerable way, with great wells of insight into their own behaviors and motivations. They can more easily perceive the world from a heartfelt, spiritual, or compassionate way. However, because they are so aware of their feelings, they can end up becoming overly emotional, lacking logic or practicality to proceed. People with many water placements in their natal chart may find themselves drawn to be mystics, healers, psychologists, or doctors. They utilize their empathy and understanding of the human spirit to better connect and work for others. Let's go air sign, which I'm an Aquarius. And I assure you this is for men and women. So air signs will be Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. Air signs are intellectual, communicative, and spontaneous. These people are highly logical, curious, and adaptive. They can easily process complex ideas, projects, and relationships, and prefer variety over consistency. With the lust for life, they pursue expansion rather than waiting to be rooted and one plan forever. As visionaries and free spirits, they are eager to explore and are often quiet social. However, because they are so cerebral, they can actually be quite detached from the emotions or the practical world. People with a large amount of air in their birth charts make great teachers, communicators, architects, or planners. They can easily think outside the box and utilize their knowledge and people skills to make things happen. Fire. The fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The fire signs are passionate, courageous, and impulsive. These people inspire us to pursue adventure, take risks, and express ourselves. They often have high levels of energy and enthusiasm. They love to burn hot and shine brightly. Quick to embrace spontaneity, their emotions are afferent. Oftentimes, they are quick to love, to feel fury, or to act. However, because their energy is so alive, they can also change their minds quite quickly too. People with a lot of fire in their birth charts are often drawn to become performers, athletes, artists, or creators. We are typically enchanted by people with fire energy because they are unafraid to step into the spotlight. Earth. Earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Earth signs are practical, stable, and grounded. These people are very hardworking and value stability and security in all areas of their lives. Their solid energy allows them to tackle long-term goals and plans. Where the other signs will lack perseverance, as natural managers and builders, they create structures in their lives and society that have an impact. However, as the slowest moving element, they are the most resistant to change. People with a sufficient amount of earth in their birth charts are typically business or financial oriented and flourish in result-based industries. These people often become highly successful because they know how to methodically get what they are after over time. Now, this is one of the things I want to touch on because I know some of you will hear that and be like, that's not me. Or a lot of times, as I said before, you'll read your horoscope and it doesn't fit you, but you'll read another sign and it'll fit you. So as it says here, you are a mix of many elements, not just one. This is something I've been telling people for years, but they don't want to understand it. While it may be easy to think that you're just one element due to your sun sign, we actually have many planetary placements in our birth chart that impact who we are in totality. For instance, your moon sign and ascendant will play a significant role in how you react and how you present yourself. Your other natal planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, also have their own unique energies, but may fall into different fire, earth, air, or water signs. By realizing that we are a mix of many different elements, we can better understand that there are multiple facets to what makes each of us unique, rare, and beautiful. So some of this may be confusing to a lot of people. You are used to reading horoscopes, and then horoscopes give you, specific things that you should do. You should be more friendly this day, or today you might feel like this, or this might happen, or, you might lose your job, or it might be issues. So the question I usually get from a lot of people about this is, how do they know? What is that? Go online, use your phone or what have you, and you go to horoscopes, and how do they know? How do they know in Aquarius it's going to feel like this, or this is going to happen to a Cancer or a Leo? How do they know? And you have to understand that we get caught up and we're arrogant, really arrogant about, history and information. Like, we just started this shit a week ago. This is thousands of years of research that they have been doing. Remember, we can go back to the ancient Egyptians, and there's astrology. People understood atoms, they understood moods, they understood the stars, and all this stuff I'm talking about. They know, they already knew. So you have to understand that over the years and doing the research and being around people, which this would be a physician that would really be, compiling this information during, medieval times, because it's so many people that they're checking on and dealing with, and they understand these traits. And over time, they compiled what makes who what. And it's like a list. And it's people who are astrologers. If you get into that, you would study it. And this is like so much information you have to get into, and how it relates to people, and what are the things that they use to help determine this is what we're talking about here.